Welcome back once again to DF Direct. In this case, actually, DF Direct Retro. We're talking about some retro gaming related goodness today, specifically the Famicom Disk System. I just got into it recently. I've mentioned it on previous directs, but after exploring the library and trying to understand what the heck this thing is about, I think it's really cool. So I want to talk about this today, talk about its history, its technology, some of the games in the system, what it brought to the table, that sort of thing, the different hardware, and even some cool little, I guess you could say, mods. And to do that, of course, I'm joined by my good friend Audi, who happens to work for Sekai Project. He is a great game historian as well, and has been helping me out on some recent DF Retro projects. So, how's it going, man?
Pretty good. It's pretty hot here. We're cooling down with the Lillehammer Winter Olympics behind us.
Of course.
94, a great year.
We use this to keep the area as cool as possible.
Pretty much, you know.
Because it is a heat wave.
Yeah.
We're going up to 38°C this week.
Yeah.
It's going to be
Thanks for inviting me.
It's the perfect time.
Thanks for inviting me.
The perfect weather. So, before we get into the FDS, I did want to talk about a couple things as we do. And for those that don't know, the DF Direct that you might have seen showing up recently, we're trying to do this weekly show where we talk about subjects and topics that are interesting, but not necessarily putting in the, giving it the full episode treatment, the full fat experience. This is like the 75% fat experience,
right,
if you will. So the first thing though, before we jump to that, 198X, I guess it's called. I want to talk about this real quick. This retro throwback game. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It came out recently on PlayStation 4, already out on PC. It's, rather than just being a game unto itself, which it is, it plays well, it's like meant to be this like experience of the 80s. So there's a lot of really nice pixel art and some storytelling. Basically involves someone sort of living in this weird city and experiencing, just stumbling upon this arcade and sort of experiencing these games. And it's kind of a
coming of age story via video games.
Yeah, exactly. So it starts with sort of a bare knuckle Streets of Rage style game with really cool music.
It's like a Neo Geo game, Lost in Time.
Yeah, exactly. So what about, there was the music, the soundtrack has some really cool tracks and people involved.
Yeah, some really talented people on it, and of course my good friend Yuzo Koshiro was on it.
Of course.
Did 5 tracks, I believe.
Okay.
So yeah, it sounded amazing.
Yeah, it did. And yeah, it just has a really cool pixel art style, like really nice looking graphics. The mechanics of each of the games feel really solid. It's not as in-depth as a typical game. It's not quite like Blazing Chrome, for instance, in that sense, but it's this really emotional, satisfying kind of retro experience, and I really, really like what I've played. It's definitely worth checking out, and the price is also very low, so it's under $10. So that's just something I've been playing recently. What else? Oh yes, one other topic. What did we get yesterday?
Yeah, so yesterday we went to the customs office and you got your GBA consolizer.
That's right, so the consolizer, there's been some reviews out there. I finally got my hands on it. It's sort of it's a consolized version of the Game Boy Advance with the original hardware, HDMI output, lots of really cool features to fix the colors in some of the GBA games. I'll be checking that out soon, so that's really exciting to look at.
I didn't even know about this until he told me a few days ago.
Yeah, it's so cool. I agree. I love it so far. But, that's for the next video review, whatever. But with that out of the way, I guess we should probably talk about today's main topic on DF Direct Retro.
カセットの時代からディスクカードの時代へゲームの世界を大きく変えるファミリーコンピューターディスクシステム
This is the disk system. Beautiful, deep red color, black front. So a lot of you probably already know about this. Some of you may not. It's a cool little system. So 1986, Japan. The Famicom's been out for 3 years. RAM, the chips used on the ROM chips used in cartridges were rather expensive at the time.
Very expensive at the time, yeah.
So creating large capacity games was not an easy thing to do in terms of distribution cost from the manufacturers. So games were fairly limited. This was really, I think, before we saw like advanced mappers and such in carts. This was very early in the lifetime of the system.
Yeah, I think like Mario and the black box in Nintendo games, those were like without mappers. That's how simple the games had to be.
So the disk system then releases, and first of all, it sits under the Famicom itself. it plugs in with a serial adapter in the back that goes into a RAM cartridge that inserts into the Famicom disk port. So it boots up like a normal Famicom game, where you're basically just using a cartridge, and that launches into the main menu. Right. You know, you insert your disc and you begin to play. So the idea is that the cartridge itself has, I think it's 32 kilobytes of memory on it, 32K?
Yeah, it's about that.
And the disc then loads from the serial cable up through into memory, and there's like a microchip in there which controls the I/O of the system here. So you're basically feeding data into the RAM cartridge, which then behaves like a Famicom game, basically. And so, so these cards then, they were 2.8-inch discs. I think they were called disc cards.
Disc cards.
There was 2 sides to them. They hold 112K total, but each side has 56K. So you basically, with most games, you pop it in, it loads into the menu. It loads the game's main menu, whatever. I guess it's loading some memory and some data into memory. And then when you want to start the game, it's usually switched to side B. And that's sort of like where it's loading the rest of the data.
Rest of the game, yeah, mostly the game.
So in that sense, that's actually one of the inconvenient points of the system.
Yeah.
There's a lot of loading.
A lot of loading. I mean, I remember the first time I played this thing, and the loading time, I was in Japan. I was like, oh great, I finally get to play the Famicom Disk System, and the loading was just, almost 5 minutes at some points.
Oh, so, most games aren't that bad.
There's some.
I've been playing on my Famicom Twin.
Like the adventure games, couldn't get very long.
Yeah, so another thing though that's really cool about the system is this. It has a battery compartment. And so this uses C batteries, but it lasts for months of use on this thing. It also works with an AC adapter, of course, but I suppose if you have 2 power bricks, might not have the room for it, so they thought ahead, put some batteries capabilities in this thing.
Yeah, and power outlets in Japan in the 80s, most houses were a little bit traditional, a little bit older, so they didn't actually have that many power outlets usually.
So that's obviously going to be an issue. So other things that are cool, that's right, so I guess on the console side, this was one of the first systems I remember that has like a BIOS kind of screen.
Right.
You load up into this menu, you boot the game, you get sort of the copyright text at start. This is all the type of like user experience that would appear in later CD-ROM based systems like Mega CD, PC Engine to some degree.
It even has Easter eggs. You can have Mario and Luigi run around that BIOS screen.
Of course. So that's cute, and even the FDS BIOS screen music.
Right.
Famously, I mean, this was shown years ago, but the GameCube BIOS menu screen has the same tune, but slowed way down, sort of an atmospheric version of it.
Yep.
So,
but so the cards, because many people think these are actually floppy disks, which
right.
you already kind of touched on, but they are not. How do they actually work?
So, as best as I can tell, first of all, the format itself is based on, I think they said Mitsumi's quick disk technology.
The quick disk, yes.
But what makes the FDS unique specifically is that to save on cost, no doubt, the unit itself only uses 1 motor. Where normally a floppy disk drive would have 2 motors. Yeah. Essentially, you could independently move the head and spin the disk. Here, when you spin the disk, the head is moving and it has a mechanism to decide when it goes back. So you basically read it in a linear fashion, more like a cassette tape, so to speak. So it's more like a tape drive in a second. I think it's only 12K per second transfer rate as well. So when you start the game, the head travels down the disk till it reaches the end, and then it can go back up. So you're kind of limited just by how fast you can get data from there. But because of the way it works, you're not constantly reading the disk during gameplay. Right. It's always based on loading data from the disk into the memory in the RAM card and then playing from there. So depending on how complex your game is, due to the limited memory in the RAM card, you can run into, more loading issues, like Castlevania 2, Dracula 2. Yeah. That's a nasty one in terms of just loading screens everywhere.
But the text that scrolls by when it turns into night is much faster because it's less characters to write.
Actually, that's a good point about that. if you remember the day to night text in the NES game, it was always, you know, wait slowly, the text scrolls out and changes.
So I guess
FDS
it
version,
balances out between like
yeah, it's much quicker. Also, the text here on the Nintendo logo on the disc, that's part of the copy protection system,
Yes.
where it physically has to insert pieces into the engraving here, and if you can't do it, it won't close properly, it won't be able to use the disc. Obviously, there's additional copy protection as well, I believe. So, you know, there's a lot about this that's interesting. The discs themselves are pretty neat, I think.
Yeah. So actually, distribution of these are kind of interesting. So if you look at this is pro wrestling, by the way. Famicom Wrestling Association on the Famicom Disk System. But if you see here, if you turn it over, it actually has ice hockey. So some games actually had 2 games per disc, so it made it cheaper to pick them up. Also, another thing you can do with these is that you could buy blank discs and go to the disc writer vending machines. And there you could also pick up games for like 1,000 yen, I think. Normally these retailed for about 3,000 yen, 3,200 yen.
Yeah, so they're cheaper than cartridge games.
Oh, absolutely.
By a lot.
So, I mean, that was the main selling point.
That was the point, yeah.
Yeah. So you could actually pick up games by writing them onto a blank disc, something they did for Super Famicom as well later on.
Right, right.
So this also, though, introduced something that's kind of unique. There was a lot of unlicensed games for the FDS. So yeah, you could write homebrew software or just some questionable games onto these.
And I think, I guess another important feature with these then is the fact that you could save.
Yeah.
So this is before save batteries were really a thing in Famicom and NES games.
Quite by a few years. Yeah, so you'll notice on a lot of these Metroid, Zelda, these kinds of games, you actually have, on Castlevania I think also, right?
I think so.
Yeah. So on those games you actually have a new like name registration and save screen that's not on the NES versions.
And in fact, the Japanese Metroid, the save screen is a lot like many other Nintendo games that follow,
same as
where you have like the
Zelda.
3 slots and you put in your name and you go from there.
It even has that little Samus icon on the sides. It's really cool to see those small differences. And in Castlevania's case, or Akumajo Dracula, it actually has new music on.
That's right.
Rather, it has music that's not in the NES version on that save screen, I guess.
That's true. So that's interesting, and you mentioned music. So one of the coolest features of the system, I think anyway, is the sound hardware. That little chip that controls the I/O also adds additional sound channels, which are fed in through the cartridge slot, right? So FDS games can sound different than normal Famicom or NES games in that they have access to additional sound channels. Very strange the way it works and sounds, but it does create some unique audio profiles. And one thing that occurred to me when looking at this here is, you know, a lot of later generation Famicom games, Dracula, I think Dracula Densetsu, is it? Or is it Akumajo Densetsu? That's the Game Boy one.
Yeah.
That has the VRC6 from Konami, so it's an extra sound chip to create fuller sound. I've talked about this before. That's also fed through the cartridge slot.
Yes.
So it seems to me that those extra channels or the pins on the cartridge slot possibly were there for the FDS, or maybe that was just the way they decided to do it. But either way, game carts use this later. The NES, the North American and European version, doesn't have this. Those are actually run into an expansion port on the bottom of the unit, right? So a cart like Akumajo Densetsu would not work with the extra sound channels. It doesn't. They're not there in the slot. You can mod it, but by standard it doesn't work. And I always wondered, why is that expansion port there? And I suspect that the disk system was announced for US release at some point. That was probably a thoughtful design element when they created the NES instead of the Famicom, to make it so that they could have a disk system-like attachment that doesn't rely on a RAM cartridge slotted into the top of the unit, especially because it has the toaster design.
Yeah, it's completely
so you could just stick that on the bottom, the extra sound channels come through there, everything works great. So maybe I'm off base on that, but that seems logical, right?
I think actually it was mentioned in the earliest kind of promotional text for Nintendo before they kind of launched that it would be a disk system coming out. I'm not sure about that though, but I would think because of that expansion port, they did have some ideas.
Exactly. That's my guess as well. So what does it bring, I guess? So I decided to put together some examples. So here's a few games that were released where both on Famicom Disk System, but also received a cartridge version, sometimes in just North America, sometimes elsewhere, all around the world, sometimes later in Japan.
Much later.
I guess the first one that really stands out is, actually behind me I have Zelda 2 going on here. So the Adventure of Link, that uses the extra sound channels for numerous things, including some sound effects, but the title screen in particular sounds significantly different on the FDS. Take a listen. That's really different, right?
It's really different. I kind of skipped over these games earlier when I started collecting FDS, so I'm just kind of surprised to see how different it was.
Yeah, also like there's little details like here, the water, right? When you very first begin the game, right at the start of the game, there's animated water on FDS, not on NES.
That's a strange change too. It's just one frame, you know,
Yep.
Animation that they changed. Also, the overworld icons for the enemies are completely different.
That's right. There's also different sound in like Kid Icarus, for example. This is another one. So listen to this. Maybe not as profound a difference as Zelda, but it still sounds different. It's interesting. And the same for Metroid. Yeah, I mean the music there sounds decidedly different, but the sound effects also really stood out.
Right. What do you think is the better one though? Do you think the NES version sounds better, or the FDS original?
I kind of prefer the FDS version, especially
Me too,
it sounds like the door opening sound.
Yeah. Those digital sound effects are really interesting.
However they did it, I think it's some sort of like wavetable or something.
Yeah.
I need to look more into the way that this extra sound channels work. I haven't studied it too deeply, but it's fascinating.
It gives it kind of like a creepy atmosphere because those sounds sound almost out of this world for the Famicom. So it adds another layer to just the whole sound design.
And this is true for a lot of the FDS library I found. Sometimes it's just sound effects. Sometimes it's integrated into the music. Other times, they don't really use it at all. I think when we talk about the games, there's a few examples that I think sound really good on FDS.
Right.
But actually, we should probably talk about,
just the library.
Why the heck would you even want this?
Right.
Today, it's not the easiest thing to keep alive due to the belts fail, calibration is difficult, the discs can go bad.
You know all about this, by the way.
I spent a lot of time working on that twin Famicom that I've mentioned in other directs, and it was a pain in the butt. And I also got a regular Famicom Disk System, and I've just been messing with it and playing around. And by the way, all this capture I've been doing, I used the analog NT Mini to do it because due to the way the RAM cartridge works, you can just pop that thing right into the NT Mini and you get HDMI Famicom Disk System, so works great.
Yeah.
But so the games, actually one of the first ones I want to talk about is Biomiracle Boku Teupa.
Right, a Konami game.
It's a Konami game. This is that bizarre platform game where you play as, a baby.
Yeah.
An infant.
With the little toy.
Yeah, so you rattle the toy, hit the enemy, and then you can run into them and it sends them flying off in the direction in which you sort of hit them, which creates some interesting gameplay opportunities. But what I really like about this is this is one of the best examples of music on the FDS. So here's how it sounds on the FDS. Now, years later in 1993, Konami released this game on a cart for the Famicom, and it just so happens it's one of the most expensive games out there.
Yeah, don't look up the price.
Yeah, it's, let's just say that usually involves 4 digits.
Usually.
So it's not a cheap game to get, but so in this case, I'm using the NT Mini to sample this.
Yeah.
I do have a disc for Bokute Uppa on the way, so.
Oh, do you?
Cool. Yeah.
Cool.
But let's do the comparison. Like, it still sounds good on the cart.
Oh, absolutely.
But the extra sound channels here, I really like the extra nuance it gives to the audio. But what about you? What's a game that sticks out?
For me on the FDS, I like experimentation a lot. So for me, a game like Family Composer, so that's not a game,
Right.
but for me as a game music lover, this is like the follow-up to Ikanari Musician on the Famicom. So we actually have the disc here, but Family Composer kind of lets you lightly compose and play around with the sound capabilities of the Famicom and FDS. I think that's really, it's an example of what you can do with this FDS system. Just kind of give more of a software feel to the whole thing. And I love the sounds. You can, like, we were playing around with it earlier and had all these different melodies, and we were just playing around, changing it around. It sounds wonderful. That's something I wish we had as a young kid loving game music. I would have loved to play with this when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's basically, I guess this is what the FDS allows, is more almost computer-like experiences.
Right.
And although, I mean, I guess stuff like Mario Paint would try to follow up eventually.
Yeah, that's definitely a follow-up to that kind of
not
stuff.
on the Famicom.
Yeah.
By the way, I love the packaging on this system. There's
Yeah,
little
yeah.
discs and the little disc cases and the way they have those manuals slotted in there. It's really, it's cool.
Some games also came with bigger boxes, by the way.
what I've seen, yeah.
Usually the Square games came with these long boxes.
I think Square had a canceled game on there.
Definitely. So actually, for Square fans, this system is interesting. So there are the canceled games, specifically Aliens 2,
That's right.
which is based on the hit movie. And isn't the greatest game. It did come out on the MSX2, however, same game. So, but there is a leaked prototype of it. Has a Nobumatsu soundtrack. So Nobumatsu did a lot of different FDS games. He also did Nakayama Miho Tokimeki High School, which is a visual novel type game where you can. She was a popular idol at the time.
All right.
Came with a VHS cassette. So very interesting, has Nobumatsu on it, Cleopatra and the Mahu. There's different Square games like that.
Another thing that's interesting to me about the system, though, is a lot of Nintendo's big franchises and even some other companies, they kind of started here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, you look, there's Zelda got its start on the Famicom Disk System. Metroid, of course, Kid Icarus. And then, of course, one that's interesting to me that you hear all the time, but it's fun to finally play it for myself on real hardware, is Doki Doki Panic.
Yeah, Yume Doki Panic.
Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic, exactly. That's, so, I mean, do I even need to go into the history? This is the game that became Super Mario 2.
Right, we can quickly
US.
mention, though, because you weren't quite aware of it, but this was a Fuji TV tie-in.
Right.
Like a bumper commercial between programming. It was a programming block that used this family of, you know, this classic cartoon Arabian tale-style characters. And they were made into the video game. So they weren't a cartoon. I see it online sometimes mentioned that, oh, it was based on anime. Actually, it was just animated bumpers between a programming block in Japan
Which is
for
kind
Fuji
of bizarre.
TV.
But it was a
very bizarre.
Nintendo-developed game even. So
Yeah, with
just...
Shiggy and everyone involved.
And yeah, I mean, it's... The opportunity that they had with making the US version is fascinating to me because the original game is good, but it has some rougher edges, some of the visuals aren't quite as polished. They do use the FDS sound for a few limited things, but otherwise, it's a similar game with different art.
Yeah, a little bit less animation on the
Less
stages.
animation as well. So when they brought it out elsewhere, it's basically they had a chance to go back to an already finished game and essentially tweak it and change it, and it's like, okay, I've finished this, how can I make it even better? Because sometimes hindsight allows you to go back to a previously created work and improve it. And I think they did. They really did make a better game, but it is cool to see the original version as well.
It plays well, so it's not a bad
it
game.
does.
It's just, it was improved for the USA release.
Exactly.
And Super Mario USA did come out in Japan
As
under
a
that name.
cartridge.
Yeah, as a cartridge.
And of course, Super Mario Brothers 1 and 2, the Japanese games, I think, wait, did 1 show up on the disc system?
Oh, so 1 and 2 are on the disc system.
That's what I thought, yeah, 1 and 2 are both on the disc system.
So 1 is the same. Speaking of Super Mario on the FDS, it's kind of interesting because it has the Super Mario 2, we should quickly mention, the sequel to Super Mario 1.
That's just the heart.
It's just a Kaizo, the original Kaizo Mario.
Yeah,
it's
exactly,
just very difficult and unforgiving. I've beaten it once. It took years off my life, so I'm actually 70 years old. Just because of that game. But also you have Night Nihon Super Mario Brothers.
That's right.
Which you weren't familiar with, and
No,
it's kind of
I was
interesting.
not.
So it was like a raffle giveaway where you would get an official ROM hack. And in the game you have a Tamori, which is he's still famous in Japan. Have you seen like the Boss coffee commercial with Tommy Lee Jones?
Of course, yeah.
The guy with the sunglasses.
Yeah.
That's Tamori. He's still around, still on TV all the time. That's him that's in the game, along with some other celebrities. So it's just a simple ROM hack, Super Mario 1. But it's interesting to just see that like that concept started on the FDS. That concept of changing Super Mario around is today probably the most popular ROM hack.
That's right. And that was an officially released game, not a disc writer only game.
Yeah. It was released as a raffle
because
on
there
the radio
were
station.
games that only appeared on the disc writer kiosks, I believe.
Yeah, definitely. It was like Bomberman was one of them from
Bomberman was
Hudson. There's several others on
But
the top of my head. Yeah.
It's an interesting idea where it's.
But again, that goes back to the vending machines where it was cheaper to pick it up
exactly.
and just write on a disc.
Exactly. Now, I guess one thing has really hit me playing these games is that most of them, you can feel the period of time from which they were made. These do feel like very early games for the system because obviously the NES came out in North America and Europe much later. So by the time, the first couple of years, we were getting into the stride of things. I mean, developers in Japan were very familiar with the hardware and were really starting to push new boundaries.
Right.
Where this was like in '86, right? So this was still like the early generation of NES hardware, and they didn't have, obviously, you're not having the mapper chips to go crazy. So you're more relying on the extra hardware in the FDS, or at least that singular chip and the extra memory there.
So you're pushing the base software as far as you can, basically.
Exactly. But, I mean, stuff like, again, Metroid obviously started out there. That's a cool...
Yeah, another thing that's interesting with the FDS is that it's a showcase of product placement and kind of tie-ins, because we did have with E.T., Indiana Jones on the Atari, but on the FDS you definitely start seeing it a lot more. You have Gal Force Eternal Story, which was an anime at the time. Dirty Pair, Project Eden, we should mention, that was one of the most popular games on the system.
Yeah,
one of the worst as well.
It's not good, but I appreciate the concept of having, you can play on foot, but there's also a vehicle.
Yeah, that
you can
vehicle
jump into
thing.
And take control of at any point.
A lot of digital sound effects.
Lots of digital sound effects.
That was a popular anime at the time. That, it's interesting to see then that that bumped the sales. Was an early prototype of just kind of like that tie-in, which became very popular during the 80s and 90s. Not around today. You don't get so many movie tie-ins.
What about, I think you brought a copy of Monty on the Run.
I did. I mean, that's not tie-in, but that's definitely an interesting thing. We have it here. This is Monty on the Run for C64 and Spectrum players. Monty on the Run was basically one of the best games, especially for the Spectrum, which didn't have that many good games. And this is a Yalico conversion of that game.
Which is super weird, because, I mean, it's a PC or old computer,
microcomputer
game. Brought to Japan,
right?
Imported over to the FDS, so you kind of get to hear some
Rob
famous
Hubbard.
Western, like Rob Hubbard music.
Yeah, the opening theme is in there.
Famicom.
Yeah, that's one of the most popular themes from the C64, and it's on
cool.
here. This does not share a lot with the original game. I mean, some of the designs there, but this is like about a jailbreak.
Gotcha.
And it doesn't have Monty Mole, it has Monty. So it's very different, but for British gamers especially, this is quite an interesting thing.
Very cool. Another one that I'm a big fan of on there is actually, it's called Eggerland, which is actually the Adventures of Lolo.
Yep.
First released on the FDS, and
I think it also had the MSX release at the same time.
It did. I don't have a copy of it here, sadly, but I gotta get one because the cover art on this is tremendous. It's a beautiful looking, sort of clay crafted looking cover art style.
Yeah, it's a little model of Lolo. It's
Yep,
actually fuzzy and furry on it. So I guess
super cool looking.
Lolo has fur.
Yeah. Ooh, never thought about that. But I think there was another game we should talk about that was very special that I didn't really know much about until you showed me today.
Yeah, and I had to bring this when I came down for this episode because I knew you would love it. This is Toki, which for my money is the essential game on the FDS.
This is a shooter, but with a music element, right? So yeah, it's a beautiful musical shooter. You hold down the button and tap directions on the D-pad to sort of input your different shots.
Pick up different instruments, changes instrumentation. It is really interesting.
So yeah, I mean, there's that. There's a ton of games in the system. Sometimes it's just edutainment. Other times,
I was telling you about like, oh, you can actually hook this up to a printer, and he was like, why would you hook up a FDS to a printer? And I was like, have you never played I Am Teacher, Super Mario Sweater?
I have not.
You have not, John. And so we played it. It actually just gives you a pattern for different sections of a t-shirt or a shirt, and you can knit your own 8-bit Mario sweater.
Thank you, FDS.
But this was something that they kept doing, though, because the Game Boy would also have all these kind of like...
oh yeah, it did. The sewing machine and all kinds of weird accessories. Nintendo was really throwing things at the wall back in the day. It's fascinating.
Right.
And then what was you showed me another game earlier today that was sort of like to me it looked like a prototype for Blaster Master.
Yeah, I sent you Nicole. Yeah, it definitely is a prototype of Blaster Master. It's the overhead stages, kind of labyrinth style game. It doesn't have the side-scrolling car things, but it's a very good game, and yeah, it was very interesting. Great music as well. So yeah, I figured you would find that interesting as a Blaster Master guy.
That was a cool looking game. There was also the Transformers game,
the Headmasters,
which actually looked like the side-scrolling parts of Blaster Master.
Yeah, not that great of a game, but it does have Kageyama Hiranobu's famous opening theme.
Maybe Sunsoft all those years later was like, wait, if we combine this and this, Blaster Master.
I don't think Transformers was done by Sunsoft though. But
I'm not saying it was.
No.
I'm saying they look at them both.
Oh, you're saying, oh,
that's what
all
I'm
right.
saying, you know. Now, so the thing about the FDS, as we've learned, is the hardware is not reliable. The games are often not reliable. So there is a way to enjoy this on original hardware using a very clever little thing called the FDS Stick. These have been around for a while. Relatively cheap product.
I didn't know about them until now, though.
Super cool little device. Basically, it has internal storage, enough to hold every FDS game. Pop it into a USB port, use a little tool to sort of write these to the disk, and then the other side of the stick has a connector for the serial cable that comes from the RAM card. So you can plug this into the RAM card, and then you launch it as normal, and it comes up with this nice menu showcasing the different games, and then you play them. And they even put a little button on the top to denote flipping the disc. So you tap it once for side A, tap it twice for side B, and yeah, you know, I prefer having the real discs as well, just as like a showcase. It's fun to have them, but in terms of preserving the library and being able to use it on a modern system, or just, you know, being able to play these easily without damaging or dealing with old hardware in that way, this is the way to go. So in this case, you know, I hook it up to the NT Mini, plug in the RAM cart with the FDS stick, and you're using, except for the RAM cart, you're using mostly new hardware, and it works great. Yeah, that is like the solution to this problem. of enjoying it today. But of course, it's fun to hook up the old twin Famicom or the regular Famicom with the FDS, which is kind of a beautiful, crazy looking combination.
Yeah.
So yeah, Famicom Disk System. You know, it's kind of a brief overlook at the system, my experiences with it. I think it's fascinating. I've enjoyed sort of playing around with the library. It's been one of those blind spots for me because I really never got into it before,
Right.
just because of the hardware difficulties. But I had a lot of fun restoring that twin Famicom and then getting to know some of the library and playing with it. And yeah, it's out there. It's cool.
Yeah, I always wanted one as a kid because I remember reading in one of the Commodore 64 magazines that like Titanic Mystery, which is another game we didn't talk about, but Titanic Mystery and Monty on the Run was on this obscure disc format in Japan. So that was what awakened my love and interest for the system.
Very cool. Very, very cool. So yeah, I mean, from there, you know, anything else going on? I know I'm going to be working on more videos this summer, of course. Lots more DF Retro. We're going to be doing some more, prepping some cool DF Retro projects. Going to be taking a look at Wolfenstein, as Alex would say, soon. The new release coming out. So that should actually be out by the time this video is live. So, so that looks cool. Yeah, you know, it's just got... While we were just about to film this, the postman showed up again.
Yeah, he did not interrupt us this time.
No interruption this time. They just keep coming though, but you know, the friendly postman, always great. The postman always rings twice.
It's true.
But I think it's going to do it for this sort of crazy FDS retro episode. If you like these occasional brief retro videos, let me know. You know, proper DF retro episodes obviously take quite a lot of time to produce. Not that this is quick, but this is a way to talk about additional topics outside of the scope of a normal DF retro episode. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, the more retro, the better. So, you know, that's cool. There's no NVIDIA and AMD war happening here. This is all about Famicom Disk System.
And we're all friends on that format.
Exactly. So thanks for joining me today, Audi.
Anytime.
And if you enjoyed this video, as always, be sure to like and subscribe, ring the notification bell at the top, and follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, stay retro.